Record-breaking heat across the eastern United States on the 4th of July cancels Washington, D.C.'s parade and pushes the power grid to record-breaking demand. Here is the full story behind the record heat gripping the eastern United States this Independence Day weekend, 2026. A powerful heat dome, a stubborn zone of high pressure that traps hot air, settled over the central and eastern United States during the July 4th holiday weekend, putting roughly 160 million people under heat alerts across about 30 states. Washington, D.C., which broke a 128-year-old temperature record when Reagan National Airport hit 102 degrees on July 2nd, cancelled its Independence Day parade over an extreme heat warning, joining Philadelphia and several smaller towns. Heat index values were forecast to reach 110 to 115 degrees in parts of the mid-Atlantic. The heat also drove electricity demand toward record-breaking levels. PJM Interconnection, the nation's largest grid operator, forecast demand of about 166,300 megawatts, threatening a 20-year-old peak. On June 30th, Energy Secretary Chris Wright signed two emergency orders authorizing PJM to force large power users onto backup generators and, as a last resort, to run power plants beyond normal pollution limits to avoid blackouts. The central dispute isn't the weather itself, but what it means. Climate scientists say the heat's intensity would have been virtually impossible without fossil fuel-driven warming, while energy officials counter that surging demand and retiring power plants make reliable fossil generation a matter of public safety. Both claims are well supported, they simply answer different questions. Across every side of this story, a few facts are not in dispute. The National Weather Service issued extreme heat warnings covering roughly 160 million people across about 30 states. Washington, D.C. broke a temperature record dating back to 1898, hitting 102 degrees on July 2nd, 2026. Washington cancelled its Independence Day parade, and Philadelphia and several smaller towns cancelled or shortened theirs too. PJM forecast record-breaking demand of about 166,300 megawatts, threatening a summer peak set in 2006. On June 30th, Secretary Wright signed two emergency orders under Section 202C of the Federal Power Act at PJM's request, letting PJM force data centers and other large users of 50 megawatts or more onto backup generators and, as a last resort, run plants beyond normal pollution limits before blackouts would be declared. World Weather Attribution, a network of climate scientists, concluded the heat and humidity together would have been virtually impossible without fossil fuel-driven warming. And in 2025, U.S. grid operators retired 4.6 gigawatts of coal capacity, the least since 2008, after federal emergency orders extended some plants' operations. Underneath the headline sits a structural pressure that would exist no matter who's in office. A blackout during a holiday heat wave is about as bad as it gets politically, so federal and grid officials will reach for any legal tool, including pollution waivers, to avoid one, regardless of energy philosophy. Demand from air conditioning, electrification, and especially data centers and artificial intelligence is growing faster than firm generation is being added, creating genuinely tight margins on the hottest days independent of any single storm. And both camps are using this same heat event as proof for positions they already held before the heat dome ever formed. Each side sees this moment differently, and each has real evidence behind it. The Energy Department and grid operators, including Secretary Wright and PJM, frame keeping the lights on during a deadly heat wave as a non-negotiable public safety duty, since air conditioning can be life-saving and a blackout can kill more people than the heat itself. In their view, reliable, dispatchable power must be available on the hottest days, and retiring coal and gas plants too early leaves too little firm capacity for record demand driven by data centers and artificial intelligence. Their incentive is to avoid a politically catastrophic blackout on a national holiday and to show current policy can meet surging load. The impact is real operational exposure for PJM, with the administration's fossil-forward approach tested in real time. Climate scientists and environmental advocates counter that this heat is not ordinary summer weather. Attribution science found its intensity would have been virtually impossible without fossil fuel warming, and they argue that waiving pollution limits, running dirtier plants, and relying on diesel backup generators near homes and schools treats the symptom while worsening the disease. Their incentive is to establish climate change as the driver of these worsening extremes and push for faster decarbonization rather than expanded fossil generation. The impact falls on communities near data centers and power plants, who bear the added air pollution, while their policy goals compete directly with the emergency fossil reliance measures. The data center and artificial intelligence industry argues that rapidly growing computing demand is a core driver of this load surge, but says it pays for grid upgrades and can shift to backup power during emergencies, and that reliable power is essential to American technological competitiveness. Their incentive is to preserve broad grid access for continued expansion while deflecting blame for higher prices and local pollution. The impact is that curtailment orders force costly last-minute switches to backup generators, and power prices in PJM territory triple during the event. Local officials in Washington, D.C. and nearby cities frame the cancellations simply as protecting participants, spectators, and staff from heat illness, arguing that preventing mass casualties during record-breaking temperatures outweighs preserving a celebration. Their incentive is to avoid heat deaths and liability while managing public disappointment on a major national holiday. The impact has been cancelled celebrations, strained emergency rooms amid extremely high heat-related visits, and scattered local power outages. Finally, a brief note on how coverage split along ideological and geographic lines. Center outlets like the Associated Press and Bloomberg led with the concrete facts, the parade cancellation, and the heat numbers, without emphasizing cause or policy. Left-leaning outlets such as CNN and The Washington Post foregrounded the climate attribution finding and the pollution risks of emergency diesel generators. Right-leaning and energy trade outlets, including the Epoch Times, emphasized record electricity demand and framed the emergency order as vindication for keeping fossil fuel plants running. International coverage, such as Al Jazeera's, took a more detached, systemic view, framing the story around artificial intelligence-driven energy demand straining aging American infrastructure on the country's 250th birthday. Want the whole story, every side, with the sources? It's all at pressureoftruth.com.